Hey there everyone, this one is about the dreaded double turn and is a hotly debated topic. However, today I am not here to discuss whether the double turn should stay in the game or not. Instead, let's look at it in a positive light and see how it affects our game on a tactical level. What we can do to prevent it, or maybe mitigate it, or even just take advantage of it. Firstly, let's go to the beginning of a game and discuss how our decisions affect the game we are about to play, looking specifically at drops and choosing who goes first. Who goes first? Well, that's often determined at the list building stage, by which army has the least drops, which is often dictated by who invested the most points in battalions to lower their drops, whilst accepting any design limitations that may or may not have come as a result of choosing that particular battalion, with tie breaks going to the decider of the roll-off when we choose battlefield size. Note, this has changed recently with GHB 2020, so hopefully the flowchart on screen helps. And with that, the person who finished deployment first decides who gets to go first, leaving the player who goes second to have the initiative when it comes to instigating a double turn. Can we influence the opponent to take the first turn and leave us open to a double even if they are the decider? Well, let's move on and have a look. Some armies, by their mere presence, influence whether or not your opponent will take the first turn or not. For example, if we look at an Iron Jaws vs Kharadron Overlords game and a couple different deployments, we can see how it changes the view on who should take the first turn. Firstly, we will look at the Iron Jaws. Here, they have lined up all their Gorgrunters in a Gorfist battalion in an Alpha Strike style. This gives them an effective threat range all the way into the KO player's deployment zone. This is a truly terrifying position to deploy in, that strongly discourages your opponent from giving you the first turn. After all, there's a chance that you get to their side of the table and sucker punch them immediately out of the game. If we then look over to the Kharadron Overlord side of the table, the player didn't anticipate this. They placed a minimal screen that can be easily avoided, allowing the Iron Jaws player to hit valuable targets by moving behind in a pincer. As the Iron Jaws player, you would want first turn to get that early sucker punch in before the KO player manages to bring their guns to bear. Whereas, playing as Kharadron Overlords, you would want to take the first turn just to avoid this, potentially opening yourself up to being on the receiving end of a double turn at the end of this round. But, of course, with the benefit of not taking the concentrated brunt of this alpha before you even get a turn. As the Kharadron Overlords player, how could we have prevented this? Well, let's change up our deployment and use the lessons in screening that we learnt in one of my prior videos here to see if we can change this and make it more advantageous to give away that turn and potentially take the double for ourselves. Going into deployment, knowing that our opponent has a very strong alpha strike potential, lets us deploy deep and use our units as a screen to protect the more valuable assets in the list. This is often referred to as castling, and whilst most commonly seen during deployment, can also be used mid-game. Now you can see that our Archanaut company is blocking the direct movement path of the Gorgrunters, and with some clever use of terrain, one of our sides is also more heavily protected. This means that we are at a much lower threat of being knocked out of the game first turn by the Iron Jaws, and in fact, on the balance, I would say it is now very opportune to give away the first turn. It will force our opponent to spend their early movement gaining board presence and doing relatively little damage to our army. It will also open up the opportunity for us to get the double turn as opposed to the Iron Jaws player. A disaster for this Iron Jaws player's list if it occurs, due to their low body count and relatively weak support heroes compared to our precision damage and mobility. Taking a step back for a second and looking at the General's Handbook, we can see that certain battle plans incentivize or disincentivize taking a double turn naturally. For example, if we look at the Blade's Edge, we can see that the rules state that whoever goes second in the round after the first is allowed to remove an objective from the game. This makes castle-based armies less likely to want to take the double turn, as it then forces them to move their strongest line of defense, as often the competing player will just remove the objective under the castle. Similarly, in Knife to the Heart, due to objectives being inactive for the first 2 rounds of the game, the turn 1 to 2 double turn is drastically less powerful and often not taken even if offered. This makes most players opt to take the turn 2 to 3 double turn instead, which has the potential to instantly win a game due to the objectives being turned on right as the turn ticks over. Sometimes we have gone first and we need to try and minimise the damage a potential double turn will cause us. Even being aware of this has a high probability of helping us to hold back from overextending. After all, overextension in Age of Sigmar, when the enemy has the opportunity to take a double turn, is often fatal. Tactics wise, we're going to once again look towards screening, and sometimes in general or even on a certain flank. For example, looking at the following game, I am pushing hard into the left flank, and I will often leave a unit in the middle of the table to act as a screen or a speed bump to delay that counter thrust that presents itself when my opportunity takes their turn, followed by a potential second turn. The great thing about using techniques like this is that whilst it is not 100% foolproof, and nothing ever can be in a dice game, it does generally give our opponent 2 separate opportunities to fail their dice rolls, once in charging and clearing the initial screen, and then, if they take the double turn, moving forward past where the roadblock was, and then doing another turn of charging straight after this, and again another round of combat. Each one of these has a chance of failure of dice, which could leave them open to an even stronger counterpunch, as they would now be drastically overextended. As a special note, when doing techniques like this, I would like to note that if the unit you're blocking with has even a remote chance of surviving the combat, it's often worth saving a command point. You could quite often pay for the battle shock test and lock the enemy unit into combat with them for their double turn, thus wasting any movement they would have even had to move it into the main bulk of your army. Finally, let's move to the fun side of the double turn and talk about using it yourself. Making the best use of a double turn opportunity starts in your prior turn. Let's move to a game of Iron Jaws versus Ogres and see how we can make use of a double turn without exposing ourselves too much if we get the fabled priority roll. Here we have an Ogre army with a screen and our Alpha Strike build for the Iron Jaws. How can we try to make the most of this despite the screen? In our opening turn, let's charge the screen with a relatively small amount of our force, say the squads of 3 Gore-Grunters. As you can see, when we've made the charge, we've also charged sideways. What this will do is maximise the width our Gore-Grunters occupy, whilst also assuring that we will clear the Noblar screen. Should we not get the double turn, the fact that we've charged sideways will create a blockage and stop the Ogre player counter-attacking and hitting the more valuable units within our army. But as we're talking about using the double turn, let's move on and assume that we won the double turn roll and see what we can make of it. As with most players running Alpha Strikes, I in particular love getting the double turn, especially on Iron Jaws. There's just something satisfying about it. Here, as the Iron Jaws army, with our Gore-Grunters held back, we are still in buff range of our War Chanters, which is excellent because it helps bring the hammer down even harder. and using the gentle charge we were protected if we had failed the double turn, but now we would move them aside slightly using the huge movement presented by a cavalry army and let the main force move up to put the damage exactly where it needs to be. All things going our way and the ogres having no screen, we will bring the hammers to bear and hope to destroy them before they can ever recover. This is essentially a coup de grace. Of course, a demonstration like this is quite specific to melee hammer armies like Ironjawz. If we were to look at something like Caradron Overlords or Seraphon, who tend to use shooting in conjunction with a double turn, they can often achieve the same effect. Or even, they can sprinkle damage across the enemy army and force a set of battle shocks in the first turn that consume all the command points of the enemy army, then do it again a second turn. The enemy will not have had chance to get its command points back, and then you will cause truly devastating battle shocks across their army before they even get a chance to retaliate. Thanks everyone for watching, and I hope this video has given you some additional tips or thinking points when it comes to your game. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I would like to focus on the tactical elements presented as part of this chat. For example, the screening to mitigate a double turn, the holding back to then use a double turn, or perhaps the use of our command points, or in OBR's case, their relentless discipline, to protect them from a potential devastating strike. As a final note, I would like to mention something seemingly obvious, and that's if you are going to go second in a round and do not have a double turn, you cannot possibly be double turned yourself. So for those seeking to avoid it entirely, a possible avenue to take is to design your armies to go second and to never take the double turn off your opponent. The only way you could then get double turned would be to lose the priority roll and they give you the double turn. I'd love to hear your comments below on tricks and tips you think I've missed that may greatly help you in games and that you think may help other watchers of the video, as this is a particularly tricky part of the game to deal with. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.